Hello and welcome to the final part of my Mother 3 playthrough, the bonus episode. We will now be covering a bunch of the content I didn't show in the series but thought was still worth mentioning. This will in no way be comprehensive, by the way. New things are being discovered about this game all the time, and with that in mind, I'm open to possibly making a follow-up some point in the future. This video will be ranging from some pretty obscure trivia to fairly common knowledge about the game. Additionally, I'll be touching on a few things I actually did cover in my playthrough, as I anticipate not everyone watching this video watched my full 50 episode series. And finally, this video will contain spoilers for several events in Mother 3. Alrighty, let's go. For the first thing we'll look at, you don't even have to go much further than the first screen of the game. The sound player allows you to listen to every song in the game and even hides the names of tracks you haven't reached yet during the story on your save file. Though not overly practical for listening to the OST now, it has some neat features. It has a favorite function, and you can see your favorites in a secondary menu, which also has shuffling and replay features. Another interesting thing about this is that it gives you a lock ability, where you have to input a short button code to regain control of the game. Again, not practical, as you can find both higher quality versions of the soundtrack and access it easier on YouTube now. Contemporarily, it was a nice feature to include. There's a pretty rare piece of text in EarthBound, welcome to the EarthBound bonus episode, where if your save data becomes corrupted, you'll get this message on the file select screen reading, "We're very sorry, but the record of adventure number insert save file here has been lost," which is noticeably incorrectly formatted, which they likely didn't bother doing as it's so rare to see anyway. Mother 3 also has a save file corruption message, though much more reeled back. The effectiveness of the healing item Peculiar Cheese varies from character to character, with those who like it recovering 60 HP and those who hate it only regaining 20 HP. Characters who love it include Flint and Duster, and those hating it being Kumatora, Salsa, and Boney. However, this trait for Lucas actually depends on another factor. If Lucas's name contains an even number of letters, he'll love it, but if his name contains an odd number of letters, he'll hate it. I actually didn't know about this until recently myself, as I always play with the default name, so I just never saw it. Another thing having to do with names are Lucas and Klaus's names are actually anagrams for each other, and come from the trilogy of novels by Hungarian writer Agota Kristof, collectively known as The Notebook, which Itoy has stated was a huge influence on much of the game. I won't be covering these novels now, as I might make a video on them in the future, but they're, pretty dark. When starting the game, the text, "Welcome to the world of Mother 3, will appear on screen. However, in an early version of the fan translation, a pretty funny bug was present that would incorrectly display it as this. This was a bit of a meme on Starman.net for a while, and even led to Fangamer producing a cloth patch with the message for a bit, which was pretty funny. This has since been patched out. Here's a weird thing, the fan translation actually has anti-piracy measures. If the disclaimer screen is altered graphically, the game will just spit out garbage text during gameplay, making the translation completely useless. One step further, if one attempts to remove or bypass the disclaimer screen, the entire game will crash and screech, rendering the game entirely unplayable. In the prologue, if you force yourself to lose to the mole cricket, you get some alternate text when rematching him. There are multiple instances of bosses having altered text when rematching them if you lose, which we'll be covering as we go. I covered this in my playthrough, but since I'll get a ton of comments if I don't mention it, here are all the chapters and locations in which the doorknob appears or is mentioned. Finding it every time doesn't yield any reward, it's just a little thing, but we'll talk more about the doorknob later. When entering the Sunshine Forest and stopping at the Prayer Sanctuary, by putting in Hard Mode as your name, you'll be entered into a version of the game in which all enemies and bosses are given double HP and increased attack power. How to do this is revealed by a save frog during the ending and a secret message if you complete the battle memory. This mode was added in by the fan translation team, and is pretty untested, though definitely possible. If you find this mode a bit too much though, it can be turned off if you change your name to something else when asked for it again in Chapter 4 at the Clayman Factory. If during the sequence in Lighter's house you attempt to leave before rescuing Fuel, you'll get dialogue from him screaming for help, which you can trigger repeatedly if you're some kind of sadist. After completing the house segment though, if you attempt to save your game, all save frogs actually have situational dialogue for when you're pitch black and covered in soot, as they will surely tell you. After Isaac advises you to check home for your family, wait! Yeah, if when running you press the opposite direction on the D-pad, you'll run in place, and it's pretty much impossible to do on actual hardware. Also, before heading home, if you go slightly north, you can talk to Lisa for some situational dialogue, and you can only see it at this moment, as initiating the search, Lisa will not be there. And if you try to leave Tazmily, Isaac will also insist you go home. If you head to the cemetery during the search sequence, it's actually locked, this being the only point in the game you can see the gate this way. If you feel like wasting a bunch of time for no reason, my forte, You can actually refuse Boney joining your party and get all the way up to the point at the cliff where the wall staples are needed, but we'll have to return to the house to get Boney to continue. Here's a little thing: if you attempt to skip the scrap of cloth at the top of the cliff, Flint will actually turn around for it, but the Pigmask's notebook is totally skippable. The campfire scene has quite a bit of situational dialogue, even changing when Bronson enters. Even Lighter has changing text. In Tazmily, Angie and her mom will bake nuts into nut bread for you, though it's not hard to come by. After visiting Hanawa's grave, if you go to Butch's pig farm, you'll see none other than Facade. This is his first appearance in the game, and his name will actually be hidden if you try to interact with him. At the Bazaar, you can get a free flea charm for some extra defense, but there's actually another piece of equipment you have a chance of coming across. If you're lucky, you can come across the Better Stick, which is Flint's best weapon and the strongest weapon in Chapter 1, even stronger than the fresh lumber on Mount Oriander. Items here will randomly change at each story beat, but if it doesn't show up, you can save at a nearby frog and reload your file for another chance at it. If you don't stop by Bronson's house to pick up the Drago Fang before leaving town, you'll get an alternate scene with him at the prayer sanctuary where he'll give it to you. Nothing's really all that different between these two scenes, I just find it to be a nice layer of polish. When you first reach Alec's house as Flint, if you go upstairs to the twins' room, there's a graphical glitch with Flint's hat that fixes once Alec joins the party. Going back to Tazmily at this point gives access to an interaction with Lucas and Boney only found here. On Mount Oriander, you run into a couple of pigmasks who run away and make an escape in their mini airship, but you can skip them, which leads to a slightly different escape scene. Believe it or not, of all things, the child's shoe is actually completely optional. Yeah. There's such a big deal made out of it with the baby Drago and everything, and you can just completely skip it. Though it shows up in the drawer in Flint's house later, regardless if you pick it up or not. The last thing a note to mention about Chapter 1 is that the Drago boss is actually beatable without the use of the Drago Fang. If you're a high enough level, you can win without it, and it's not even some exponentially high one either. YouTube user and Mother 3 Master GGFan found roughly level 24 as the minimum level needed to accomplish this, and actually has a video of him doing it himself on his channel if you want to check it out. On to Chapter 2. Right outside Wes and Duster's house is a tree with some insignificant text on it, which I refer to as insignificant because that's what the game calls it. This text can be read at pretty much any time, but doesn't change no matter who's reading it. Each character has their own instrument that plays different notes with each hit during combos, but Duster's bass guitar doesn't quite work. While combos work exactly the same as other characters, his instrument only plays its first sound. This glitch is present in the original Japanese version of the game, but has been since patched out in the fan translation since version 1.2. If you lose to the zombies in the graveyard, when rematched by them, they'll challenge Duster near the exit to the cemetery, and again in a slightly different location if you lose again. Once you break into Oso Castle, you can open the castle gate as soon as you get into the foyer, though I prefer to open it after leaving with the Noble Spittoon. Something I somehow never showed off is that the battle memory can be used to practice battles, specifically getting combos to each song. It logs the front and back sprites of each enemy and boss, but will hide the ones you haven't gotten. It can be useful for organizing attacks among your party, testing items, or again, practicing combos. Losing to Mr. Passion provides some alt text. Many are aware of a brief conversation Duster can have with Lucas at the beginning of the chapter, but talking to Lucas again before returning to West with the Noble Spittoon provides another conversation, where Lucas makes his house guest very uncomfortable. A weird thing that happens when starting a new game is that sometimes data isn't fully erased from the previous file when saving over it. This results in Lucas and Kumatora keeping the PSI moves they've learned on other save files, as well as Lucas and Salsa retaining pieces of equipment. If these pieces of equipment are unequipped, however, they disappear forever. Lucas's equipment will automatically reset in Chapter 4, however, as the Easy Grip Stick overwrites his weapon slot, though again he'll keep his PSI powers. Last thing to mention about Chapter 2 is this alternate and shorter Egg of Light scene of rematching the Oso Snake. In Chapter 3, you can work around some of the grinding involved in attaining dung by heading out into the desert and going to this room, which will respawn dung each time you enter it, allowing you to fill your inventory to the brim with it and give it to want some dung. Dung, dung, dung. Also, if you use the dung, you get this message. This game's the shit. After witnessing Facade's phone call at night, there's an alternate scene that plays out if you try going another way then back to their room at the inn where Facade scolds Salsa then shocks him. While making happy box deliveries, if you take the box over to the hot spring by Isaac's house, you're treated to this hilarious and obscure piece of text pleading with you that it's not worth it, man. After making all the deliveries, all of the customers have alternate text if you revisit them after Facade rejoins the party, where they'll thank him for his generosity. At Oso Castle, there's actually another pig mask you can talk to if you climb Duster's wall staples on the side of the castle. Not super hidden, but one many skip over just because they don't think to go over there. In the kitchen where all the ghosts are being kept, there's this amazing message if you attempt to run. Stop! Monkey! Please don't run in here, it's cramped. Besides, Oso Castle is so small, where could you be going in such a hurry? There's also a glitch where if there's a gift box on screen and you open the main menu or map screen and go back, sometimes it'll change into a status menu icon. On to Chapter 4, you can skip the tutorial with the save frog outside the twins' house that explains how to use the DP mechanic, but insists you do, and if you don't, actually won't save your game, and this even carries over to different chapters as well, and that's just petty. At the Yado Inn, if you go to the second floor and check this door, you'll hear a conversation between two men about taking a break from something they're working on. These two men are actually none other than Shigesato Itoi and another Brownie Brown employee. This interaction is actually describing the process Itoi went through when writing the game, speaking each line of the game to someone who'd then input it into a computer. The mention of croquette rolls being a reference to them being a food they'd frequently get on breaks during the process, as well as being one of Itoi's favorite foods in general. The text for this cameo changes in Chapter 5 to a shorter message, and then to just a broom closet in Chapter 7. A neat detail is that the flowers at Hanawa's grave actually change throughout the game, showing Flint is always decorating it with new ones. When beginning your trip down the railroad tracks, this NPC warns of trains and pities the fool who's not looking out for them. However, I never actually showed what happens when you are hit by one. If you fail to dodge an oncoming train, you'll see this animation. Flint actually also has a train dodging sprite that goes completely unused, which makes sense as he was originally intended to accompany you in Chapter 4, but we'll talk more about that later. Another thing I never showed that was just absolutely criminal was sleep mode! It sort of just acts as a formal pause mode to the game outside the menus. Doing this, however, will softlock many emulators running the game, as the mode requires 3 simultaneous button inputs to exit it, and many cannot register more than 2 on keyboard, so use it at your own risk. While on the topic of things I never showed, there are actually several NPCs at the end of the mines in the Clayman factory. These NPCs have some good lines of dialogue, ranging from informative lore to just plain funny, and Kumatora! Yeah, something else cool about names is they take into account secret identities. If named Violet, Kumatora will assume her canonical name as an alias at Club Titiboo. However, if named Lucky, Duster will go by Gorgeous when part of DCMC, the other leading man of the Runaway Five. In Kumatora's room, if you position yourself just right, you can actually have a totally cool and realistic no eye contact conversation as Lucas stares at the wall. He's just like me. The Jealous Base is another boss with some alternative dialogue when rematching him. During Stone Sheet Clippers with OJ, the gloves are off. A voice sample can be heard for the two of them saying, "Ready, set, go!" We don't seem to know who provided Lucas's sample in the Japanese version, but the fan translation sample is acted by Camellia Melia Young, but was updated in a July 2018 patch, which instead features Lonnie Manella voicing the line, the voice actress for Lucas in the Super Smash Bros. Series.
Ready, set, go!
There seems to be a graphical glitch during the end of this chapter where magic is completely off color. Literally. I can only deduce that this is a glitch, as it doesn't happen at the initial DCMC concert, in Duster's room, or at the concert in Chapter 8. Time for a mole fact. Mole tunnels are more than just places to live. They also serve as traps intended to confuse and capture food, such as insects. In other words, the mole tunnels act as literal dungeons. Moreover, large-scale tunnels are over 100 meters in length and are not at all uncommon. If you ever get the opportunity, you should take some time to watch out for moles in action. Starting in Chapter 4, Lighter's house is mostly rebuilt and has changing dialogue when Duster rejoins the party. Here's an obscure one for you. If you go to the basement of Oso Castle and to the door Salsa dances in front of to open, there's a graphical overlay glitch. Incredible. Lord Passion also has some alternate text when rematching him, even breaking off into different branches. If you return to the Clayman factory, you can continue to work, though the DP isn't really worth it, as it's much quicker to get more DP just from fighting enemies. Also, the Clayman you have to gather are in the same spots every run, so it's literally just the same thing every time. Returning to the NPCs deep in the mines yields a couple pieces of great dialogue, including this iconic Ollie line. Though mostly a silent protagonist once you start controlling him, Lucas does actually have an instance of straight up speaking during Chapter 5. This pig mask who gives you a secret herb at the other Clayman factory follows up with the line, strictly in a friend sense, but if you leave the factory and re-enter then speak to him again, Lucas will say it. So yeah, not a traumatized mute after all, just a boy of few words. There's also some unused dialogue relating to the commander suit Lucas wears that is unreachable without cheats. Both Fierce Pork Trooper fights have alternate dialogue as well, both of which are pretty funny. On the highway, there are charging stations for pork beans, but if you don't charge yours, it'll die on the bridge and is unable to be repaired, forcing you to do the rest of the journey on foot. To avoid this, either charge it or just avoid this area, though one of the mice children is here. High up in Thunder Tower, this save frog, man. In the original version of the game, saving here then reloading your save file would soft lock your game, as the frog's path wasn't mapped to account for this, forcing many to have to restart the entire game. This was fixed in the fan translation. Up in Mr. Generator's room, there's a fairly famous secret, there's an oxymoron for you, where if you go around the back you'll encounter this pig mask, who is named Sheep. He's very kind and we love each other. When running from Facade at the end of this chapter, if you try to re-enter the Thunder Tower, the game encourages you not to, we'll say. Before Chapter 7, there's a dog outside Ed's house that's charred from being hit by lightning from Thunder Tower, but after Chapter 5 is no longer charred due to it being destroyed. If you keep refusing Ionia on the bridge, she'll respond with this humorous dialogue. Though strongly encouraged, the Stroke Bros are actually not required to go to Aeolia's shell. You can alternately take Ionia through the Sunshine Forest and talk to the right frog to get there. In Oso Castle, this friendly ghost will give you a rotten eclair and tell you about dolphin ossicles, which are bones in dolphins' ears. He'll give you one, but you can find these washed up on Cerulean Beach, and they can be sold for 5 DP, this being their only use. Itoi's apparently a big fan of beachcombing and owns an ossicle pendant himself. Though they don't in Chapter 3, in Chapter 4 onwards, the Collapsed Knights have some dialogue, which is worth checking out. One of the most notable things about Chapter 7 is the freedom it gives you, as you're allowed to do the needles in any order you want for the most part, aside from Ionia's having to be the last one. Many seem to be unaware that by going through the opened fence on the railroad, you can actually go to Saturn Valley right away and get Duster to rejoin you. By doing this, you can get a lot of enemy back sprites quicker, and even see his custom sprite for exiting Snowcap Mountain, though some things are a bit harder. Yeah, the only problem with this choose your own path method is that the balancing isn't taken into account, so it's always designed around the vanilla route. This becomes especially clear if you decide to go to Tain Island first. Yeah, you can actually do this with just Lucas and Boney. Funny thing to mention is if you do this, Boney will be given dialogue usually spoken by Kumatora. However, hilariously, if you do all this, you can fight the barrier trio with just Lucas and Boney. This footage was recorded by Mother3 Master GG fan, who I asked to get this footage for me because I'm nowhere near good enough to do this myself. He has a ton of awesome Mother3 challenge runs on his channel, including originating the low-level Salsa solo run, predating mine by a whole year. Anyway, this video is amazing, and the full video of the battle and his other stuff is linked in the description, and I highly recommend checking it out. Back to the beginning though, there's an elderly character in chapters 1 through 3 named Scamp who has nervous feelings for the future and is sick and bedridden. After the time skip, however, he actually passes away and has a gravestone in the cemetery. The rest of them are less sentimental though, very pun heavy. Starting in this chapter, you can ride the train from Chapter 4 to and from the Clayman factory. You can either ride a red train for 50 DP per person or a green train for 200 DP per person. They both go the same speed, and there's no other differences between them outside their colors, though Lucas doesn't experience the joy of riding a red train like he does the green one. You can revisit the Clayman factory where it will be revealed that it's being shut down. If you head down to the mines, things are quite sad and somber. All that's left are the Clayman now with no electricity to revive them, unaware they're waiting to die. The Pigmass here also name drops New Pork City, one of many instances of this actually. Many villagers in Tazmily mention it throughout the chapter, but I neglected to show them during the series so it could be a surprise in Chapter 8. If you go back up the roadway station towards Club Tittyboo, you can use the binoculars and see a destroyed Thunder Tower in the distance, which is inaccessible and the pathway to is closed off by this pig mask. There's also this note outside the club which you can't read or interact with at all, which feels like it was placed here specifically to annoy me. Inside, the club is empty, but you can check this display for a list of the upcoming DCMC concerts, which contains yet another name drop for Newport. In the area below, you can open the mole cricket hole right away and skip the battle with the squeaks, but doing this will cost you 100% completion of the battle memory, as he'll only show up if you get to him before opening the mole cricket hole. Something I missed in that Chimera lab is that in addition to the magazine from EarthBound, the shelves also contain Overcoming Shyness. Surprisingly, the almost Mecha Lion fight is completely optional to win, and it's totally cool if you lose. Doing this with Duster in your party will show a unique sprite from laying down with the pig mask on. After the ultimate Chimera sequence, you can re-enter the lab and go back to the room of skeletons to get an enemy bufferizer from this scientist. This trash can in the backyard of the lab also has some incorrectly programmed text, where it's meant to display text about donut crumbs in reference to Dr. Andonuts, but instead loads the text from a sign about the nearby hot spring. This is present in the Japanese version, but has since been patched and mended in the fan translation since version 1.2. Returning to the Clayman factory one last time shows the factory is closed down. Losing to the mole cricket in the mole cricket hole again has some alternative text. Back in Tazmily, Ollie and Sebastian have some new dialogue, which is worth checking out. In the seafloor dungeon, there's a Hermit Crab who begs you to get his home back from some rock lobster bullies. Doing so results in him giving you a 1000 DP reward, which is nice. A glitch was recently discovered where on Taintain Island, through following some careful steps, the hallucination of Klaus can actually permanently join your party, and funny enough, due to the party briefly splitting up in Argilia Pass, Klaus will actually end up leading the party. Throughout the game, an old man occasionally will appear in the hot springs, but even more rarely, a young woman can appear too, who only says, "Mixed gender bathing?" During the Taintain Island's hallucination sequence, however, they actually change as well, with the old man becoming Facade and the young woman becoming Ionia, respectively. While on the topic of the hot spring, there's a glitch on the Taintain Island one, where if you enter it with a fever, then open the PSI menu after it goes away, when you exit, Lucas will become Boney.
Julian?
This lasts until any menus or battles are opened. Another glitch here is another overlay one outside the cave higher up on the mountain. Before ending the chapter, you can go back into the underground and find the Saturn Bean, a custom Mr. Saturn themed pork bean. This only appears if the initial pork bean is recharged successfully. Despite how it's portrayed, you can actually return to Saturn Valley, the rocks having been cleared out. Nothing of note here though. On the highway, you can see those leaving for New Pork even extends to the diner. Pretty creepy. Except this guy from Chapter 5. He never leaves. Leo actually has some new text, and revisiting Mother Mouse reveals the Squeaks has returned home, with some lovely new dialogue to commemorate the event. Heading back to the nearby Clayman factory, you'll find it's now occupied by security robots and 2 pig masks at the entrance. There's an inaccessible piece of text where if you check a mirror as Boney, it says, "For a second, you thought some cheeky jerk was staring back at you." Sadly, there is no way to see this text without hacking, as the Argilla Pass segment is the only point in the game where you play as Boney. And lastly for Chapter 7, at the 6th needle, saying no to pulling it results in this amusing line of dialogue. Though I showed that the Sanchez brothers are in Newport, I didn't show off that you can actually win. You can win 4 different prizes: a chick if they're facing north, a big city soda if they face west, a bag of pork chips if they face east, and the grand prize is a magic tart if they're all facing south. Which was the only one I was able to win on recording, by the way. I had some bad luck here, man. I played this almost 40 times. I also never showed actually using the Stinkbug's memory, which presents Leader's story in a much more digestible book form, but I'll save my Leader lore dump rant for another video. I like this though, and almost wish this was how you found out, to leave a little more mystery. Something else I never mentioned is that Facade's name is actually original to the translation, his name being Yokuba originally, which is derived from Yokubari, which means ambition or greed. Facade's given name in the translation, however, does actually have a bit more going on under the hood than it seems at first glance. Being derived from the Arabic word with the same spelling that means corruption, in addition to being a double entendre for the more apparent facade. Facade's name is attributed to a Ben Kakairo, a friend of some of the translators on the project who studied the Arabic language. After beating Miracle Facade, many new NPCs arrive in Newport, such as this guy who's totally not projecting, and this pink-hooded guy who has the extremely suggestive text of, "You know, like when you eat a giant hamburger, your hands get all sticky and gooey? And like, even when you open your mouth really wide, it still won't fit? Avocado burgers are especially tough to eat, cause like, everything slides around and everything. Don't you agree? Like, it makes me wonder why girls always order avocado burgers and stuff." A toy, you dog. On the landing platform, the last of Tazmily's residents also arrive: Lighter, Fuel, Ed, Al, and Nan. There's actually another way to beat the King Porky statue other than the New Year's Eve bomb. If you're lucky, you can instantly defeat the statue with PK Flash, although the animation for it being defeated in this way is screwed up, just sort of popping out of existence. Funny enough, this method of beating the boss was actually referenced in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, in which Ness saves Lucas from the statue by hitting it with Flash. Although impossible to do as of now, the statue having 99,999,999 HP is actually defeatable without either of these methods just by fighting it. Yeah, if you actually somehow manage to do it, the game doesn't crash or soft lock or anything, you'll actually win. This is totally impossible though, as the statue can do so much damage so fast and you can't possibly do enough damage in time or have enough PP to keep your party alive to accomplish this. At the movie theater, you can purchase two weapons called the Fake Bat and the Fake Frying Pan for Lucas and Kumatora, respectively. Neither of these weapons are particularly useful, as they're nowhere near as good as the Mystical Stick or Mystical Gloves you can get in Chapter 7. They're also super overpriced, making them pretty unattractive overall. However, something interesting about these weapons is that by equipping them, Lucas and Kumatora's combo sounds will actually change. These are the only weapons with this property. It doesn't change gameplay in any way, combos will still work exactly the same. I just think it's neat. By losing to the Hippo launcher you're required to fight, strangely enough there's actually some alternate text to be seen. Nothing super special, I just think it's weird a toy decided to write situational dialogue for this, as it's extremely unlikely a player will lose to this single Hippo launcher. Although a toy is big on putting text in obscure spots, as we'll see a little bit later. Small thing, but by entering the bathroom with the Ultimate Chimera in it, you can see a lesser known sprite of it biting you from the front view. Also in the bathroom maze, you can find an item called the Honey Shower, which when used covers an enemy in honey and then conjures a swarm of bees to attack said enemy, which is hilarious and awesome. It turns out the Love Walker, one of my favorite mother enemies, is actually a reference to this radical poster for the 1972 musical drama film Cabaret starring Liza Minnelli and directed by Bob Fosse. A neat thing added to this game that EarthBound didn't have is sprites for items. And this leads to the pencil eraser from Mother 2 finally having an official look. Yeah, it's pretty bizarre and incomprehensible, and yeah, that's probably the point, but I'm glad to at least have some idea of what this cruel, cruel device looks like that's brought about so much pain. After Flint reveals the truth about the masked man to the party, you can talk to him again and he'll encourage you in the race to pull the final needle first. But if you talk to him 10 more times, he'll say something else. Geez, you're persistent. You're wondering about my hair, aren't you? That's right, I'm bald as a bean. A pretty hidden piece of dialogue. I only found out about this myself after reading an interview a toy did where he in the interview deep dived into the game and a toy hinted at how to find it. A line a lot of players most likely have missed since, in this moment you're probably a bit preoccupied and aren't thinking to talk to Flint 10 more times. Kinda reminds me of that one Easter egg in Sonic 3. After defeating Porky, if you head back down the ladder behind you, the item guy actually shows up, although he probably would have been more helpful, before the last technically real boss in the game. Regardless, always happy to see this guy. If you successfully get every front and back sprite of every enemy in the entire game, your reward is a gold star!
Well, who cares about a stupid star?
In the original Japanese version, you get the silver star for the front sprites, but the fan translation added in the gold one for completing the back sprites. Yeah, it's pretty underwhelming, and really just not worth the effort it takes. It does trigger the final save frog to tell you how to access the memos menu though, which we'll be getting to later, but you can access it regardless of the battle memory completion, so yeah, if you don't, you're not really missing out on anything except these two sprites. And of course, bragging rights. There's also no reward for mastering the battle theme combos. Wish there was some sort of marker in a menu or sign to let you know which ones you perfected though. Throughout the latter part of the game, aside from being just a weapon, the Friend's Yo-Yo also has a secondary function. Using it in the items menu on an enemy will make them applaud for you, even when it isn't apparently possible. This can lead to some pretty entertaining results, and you can even use it in the final battle. Additionally, in the last phase of the fight, you can actually hit the masked man. Yeah, if you're lucky, depending on how you look at it, you can land a hit or two on him. All it takes is inflicting Lucas with horrible, horrible trauma. In the very last moments of the story, if you for some reason say no to pulling the final needle, you're met with this incredible awkward pause, followed by Lucas pulling it anyway. Something I want to mention about the credits, by the way, is that even though naming Kumatora Violet and Duster Lucky changes their names, it just doesn't for Salsa. I named him Samba to see if it would switch their names in the credits since his girlfriend's name is never seen until then, but nope, Samba and Samba. But yeah, that's it for the main game stuff I wanted to cover, and now let's get to the beach combing and talk about some more in-depth stuff.